two AR-15s, a Gucci bag packed with pills, 25 bottles of baby oil lined up like trophies on a shelf, and in the center of it all, a silent courtroom struggling to absorb what they've just seen. This isn't a movie, this isn't rumor, this is day 8 of the federal case against Sean Diddy Combs. And today, it didn't just get disturbing, it got unforgettable. What began as a routine continuation of testimony has turned into one of the most surreal days yet. Evidence emerged that paints a portrait of power gone unchecked, wealth weaponized, and secrets hidden in plain sight. And with every new item introduced to the court, the air grew heavier. But this wasn't even the worst part. As federal agent Gerard Gannon took the stand again, no one expected what he'd pull from his evidence binder. Yesterday's session ended with a slow walk through surveillance logs and paperwork. Today, it opened with photographs that could freeze blood. Images of military-grade rifles, two AR-15s modified, broken down into parts but both suspiciously loaded, were shown to the jury. On their own, the firearms weren't illegal. But here's the twist. The serial numbers were gone, sanded off, illegible. That small detail changed everything. Because if you scratch a gun's identity away, you're not just hiding ownership, you're hiding intent. The agent didn't need to say it aloud. The message was clear. These weren't for sport, and they weren't just for show. Then came the shoes. Not ordinary shoes, not even extravagant designer shoes. These were 7-inch platform stilettos, a dozen pairs, untouched, unworn, and arranged meticulously in a closet that didn't belong to any of Diddy's known partners. One pair stood out, blood red, glossy, and theatrical. Agent Gannon held them up in front of the jury as if daring someone to explain them away. The prosecution's angle? These weren't fashion statements. These were tools, props used during what former associates had called freak-offs, private events allegedly orchestrated by Diddy where rules didn't apply and consent blurred into coercion. No accusations were made in that moment, but the visual said more than any words could. Next came the boots, high-end, Balenciaga. And inside, not inserts, not socks, 3 burner phones, tucked inside the lining, hidden from plain sight. Phones prosecutors allege were used to coordinate travel, control communications, or worse, conceal illicit operations behind coded messages and voice notes that never left the cloud. A 4th phone found nearby was still powered on when agents arrived. Let that sink in. But what truly shook the room was a single designer bag, Gucci monogram, small, elegant, sitting unguarded on a bedroom dresser. Inside, authorities found a rolled-up $100 bill, tight as a straw. Alongside it, a rainbow of loose pills, plastic-wrapped powders, and translucent crystals that later tested positive for MDMA, cocaine, ketamine, and Xanax. There were even eye drops, but not the kind for red eyes. Lab results showed they'd been laced with MDMA, a deeply troubling find, given the rumors of involuntary dosing that had surfaced in previous lawsuits. The idea that a person could be drugged through something as subtle as eye drops wasn't just shocking, it was sinister. Then it got weirder. In a separate bathroom closet, agents discovered a plastic bin containing 25 full-size bottles of baby oil and 31 bottles of Astroglide. Industrial quantities, not travel-sized. And right there, in the same bin, were 2 yellow rubber duckies. It was absurd. It was disturbing. It was impossible to explain. Courtroom attendees audibly gasped. This wasn't accidental, this was curated, intentional, and deeply personal. A setup, prosecutors argued, not for comfort, but for control. And that detail on the duckies triggered something primal. Childlike objects in the middle of an adult world of abuse. It hinted at psychological games that go beyond physical actions. And no one could look away. Beyond the velvet walls of Diddy's main estate sat a quieter structure. The guest house. Less security, fewer eyes. But what agents uncovered there wasn't an afterthought. It was central to their narrative of a controlled, secretive lifestyle. In a red suitcase tucked beneath a bed, investigators discovered a .45 caliber handgun. Not an antique, not for display. The weapon was modern, fully functional, and paired with its magazine and bullets, all neatly separated, as if deliberately staged for quick access without drawing suspicion. The box it came in originally held 50 rounds, only 41 remained. This wasn't forgotten weaponry. This was accessible. This was ready. The prosecution made it clear on this gun, unlike the AR-15s with scratched serials, still bore its identification marks. But its location, buried in a guest bedroom far from the main house, hinted at an entirely different kind of preparation. Not showmanship, not paranoia, control. And that theme, control, echoed louder with each piece of evidence laid before the jury. When it came time for the defense to speak, the atmosphere shifted. Lead attorney Tenny Garagos, sharp as ever, stepped forward, not with denial, but with strategy. She wasn't trying to erase what the jury had seen. She wanted to make them doubt it. Garagos began by questioning the sheer scale of the raid. 90 federal agents for one man? She asked, her tone hovering between indignation and sarcasm. She painted a picture of excess at helicopters, boats, tactical gear, all to serve a warrant at a private residence. Was this law enforcement or theater? The court grew tense. She wasn't denying the evidence. She was reframing it. And then she moved in for the attack. This time, not on the facts, but on how they were collected. Photos of the AR-15? Yes, the agents had taken them. But where were the before shots, she asked. How could the jury be sure that the gun parts had truly been found scattered? Couldn't the agents have reassembled them for dramatic effect? That's when Garagos dropped something few in the room had expected. According to her, boats were used during the raid. Boats? Armed agents didn't just storm the mansion from the front gate. They approached from the water, as if executing a DEA sting on an international trafficker. The implication was clear. This wasn't justice. This was spectacle. And yet, no one on the jury could unsee the photographs. While Garagos sparred with agents, while evidence was laid bare on courtroom monitors, while federal prosecutors kept pushing forward with grim resolve, Sean Diddy Combs sat still. His face, mostly hidden behind clasped hands, betrayed no reaction. But something felt different that day. Court sketch artists captured a rare image. Diddy not defiant, not slick, but sunken. His jaw clenched, eyes down as if finally absorbing the gravity of what surrounded him. But perhaps the most unsettling visual of all wasn't what the prosecution showed. It was who was sitting behind Diddy in the gallery, his daughters. 3 of them, young, present, watching. All around them, visuals of pills, guns, hidden phones, and laced eye drops glowed on the courtroom screens. And that image, a father under fire, his daughters forced to sit in silence as the government laid out a case involving alleged sexual abuse, forced drugging, and psychological manipulation, sent shivers through the room. But here's the detail that made it worse. Those daughters are the same age Cassie was when Diddy began his relationship with her, just after signing her to a record deal. It wasn't lost on anyone. Next on the stand, Dr. Dawn Hughes, a forensic psychologist with over 30 years of experience specializing in trauma and abuse. She hadn't treated the accusers personally, but she didn't need to. Her job was to explain something deeper, something the courtroom still wasn't ready to fully accept. She spoke in calm, clinical terms, but her words hit like thunder. Victims, she said, don't always run. They don't always scream. Often they stay, they comply, they smile through it, because the threat is more terrifying than the act itself. She broke her testimony into 4 pillars: why victims remain in abusive relationships, how trauma causes cognitive disassociation, why victims delay disclosure, sometimes for years, and how memory is warped not by lies, but by survival instincts. The defense objected almost immediately. She hasn't treated these women, they argued. She's guessing. But Dr. Hughes stood firm. Trauma, she said, leaves fingerprints. Not always visible, not always coherent, but patterned, familiar. She explained love bombing, the rapid, overwhelming affection often used by abusers to disarm their victims. And she discussed the role of drugs, not as recreation, but as anesthesia. a way to survive the unbearable. Her most chilling point: victims often don't even recognize they've been abused until long after it's over, especially when the abuser has money, power, and charm. The jury didn't take notes, they just watched her. The jury had just recessed when the witness entered, accompanied by federal attorneys and a visibly tense defense team. This wasn't an ordinary moment. The courtroom cleared for a closed session, a move that instantly signaled gravity. No press, no public. Just the judge, the attorneys, and the witness under oath. But invoking the fifth. Not once. Not twice. On nearly every question. The right to remain silent, the right to avoid self-incrimination, exercised with robotic precision. Speculation began immediately. Who was this person? And more importantly, what exactly had they done with or around Diddy that made them fear prosecution even now, even years later? The silence was deafening. Behind closed doors, the lawyers argued legal privilege, but outside that room, the implications were terrifying. If someone close to Diddy was unwilling to speak, even in defense, it meant what they knew could still land them in a cell. That fact alone lit up the courtroom like a live wire. The statute of limitations had already expired on much of the alleged abuse from the early 2000s. So whatever they feared being charged for had to be recent. And that meant the darkness hadn't ended. As word of the Fifth Amendment session leaked out to those seated in the hall, the tension in the building thickened. Prosecutors were clearly building a narrative of continued, active wrongdoing. Not a man haunted by his past, but one still entangled in present-day crimes. And that's when the whispers returned. Not from the defense, not from the gallery, but from the shadows surrounding this case since the beginning. The theory that Sean Combs wasn't just a rogue celebrity who went too far, but a protected asset. Online and offline, people had been connecting dots. Timing, associations, immunity that didn't make sense. For years, Diddy moved like a man who knew the rules didn't apply. Allegations would surface, and then they'd vanish. Victims would speak out and then retract. Lawsuits would appear and dissolve in hours. How does someone maneuver through decades of controversy unchecked and unchallenged, unless there's someone powerful standing behind them? That's where the name Whitney Webb started trending. Her book, One Nation Under Blackmail, had been quietly circulating among journalists and researchers for months, and now it was being whispered about by people sitting outside the courtroom. The book doesn't mention Diddy directly, but it lays out a pattern, a system, a network of influence stretching from Hollywood to Washington, where compromise, coercion, and control are traded like currency, where blackmail is not a scandal, it's a tool. And freak-offs? They're not just orgies, they're filmed, cataloged, used, stored as leverage forever. And that theory, the idea that Diddy wasn't just a participant in this system but a cog within it, now had weight. The phones in the Balenciaga boots, the drugs, the weapons, the unwilling witnesses, the sealed lips, the government silence. Then came the image that changed everything. A court sketch circulated, quickly picked up by blogs and major media outlets. It showed Diddy hunched forward, head low, hands shielding his face. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't denial, it looked like shame or fear. And that's when the public realized he wasn't in control anymore. But even in that silence, something strange emerged. The list of people not commenting on the trial was longer than those who were. High-level celebrities who'd been linked to Diddy over the years, either through business or social events, suddenly disappeared from social media. Big names, big money, no statements, no support, not even a denial. It wasn't just silence, it was strategic distancing. And then, out of nowhere, came the revelation that Diddy's team had begun the process of exploring a presidential pardon. Not from Biden, from Trump. The same Trump he publicly condemned, criticized, and mocked in years prior. Suddenly, there were backdoor inquiries, legal consultations, hushed meetings. Why now? Because the walls are closing in, and everyone in that courtroom can feel it. The final testimony of the day wasn't explosive, it was methodical. A forensic technician broke down the chemical composition of the substances found throughout the home. But what stood out wasn't just the type of drugs. It was where they were found. Eye drops on nightstands, pills in guest rooms, MDMA crystals in gift bags, meth in cosmetics containers. It didn't look like addiction. It looked like preparation. Everything arranged. And in that final hour, as the technician stepped down and the judge called it a day, no one moved. No chatter, no relief, just stillness. And an unspoken understanding that whatever this trial uncovers, whatever truth crawls out of that Miami estate and into the light, it's going to leave permanent scars. Because this isn't just about Sean Combs anymore, it's about power and what happens when the wrong person is given too much of it for far too long. Court adjourned that day with a kind of collective exhale, not relief, not resolution, but a momentary pause in a storm that still had no clear direction. The judge's gavel was just formality. No one in that room, not the jury, not the families, not even Diddy's own attorneys, believed that what they had seen was the climax. It was only the beginning of the unraveling. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered in clusters, voices low, eyes constantly darting from phones to courtroom doors. News vans hummed. Commentators argued on live feeds about what would happen next. But no one had answers, just theories. Because what the public had seen wasn't just salacious, it was systematic. This wasn't a celebrity caught with drugs. It was a blueprint for manipulation and concealment, pulled straight from the luxury closets of a multimillionaire. The question that hung in the air wasn't, is he guilty? It was, how long has this been going on? And who else knew? The prosecution seemed to understand the stakes. Their next steps weren't just about evidence. They were about framing, about showing the jury that what they were witnessing wasn't a disconnected set of strange findings. It was a ritual, a routine, a pattern of behavior repeated and perfected over time. With each new witness, they pushed this narrative. This wasn't indulgence, it was infrastructure. Their next move was expected to be bold, potentially bringing in new names, some of whom had not yet been publicly tied to the case. Sources close to the trial hinted that federal subpoenas had gone out to individuals formerly associated with Diddy's events, security teams, and inner circle. There was even word of one high-profile artist, someone who'd publicly distanced himself from Combs over the past year, being prepped to testify. That name? Kid Cudi. Rumors had swirled for weeks that Cudi, who once collaborated with Diddy, had information related to events held at private residences in Los Angeles and Miami, including one that allegedly turned violent. Details remain sealed. But what's been whispered in the court hallways is this. If Cudi takes the stand, it won't just be a character witness moment. It will be explosive. Possibly even the spark that forces others in the music industry to break their silence. That possibility has turned this trial into something else entirely. This isn't just about crimes, it's about exposure. And the higher the profile of the witnesses, the more dangerous the revelations become. Not just to Diddy, but to the entire web of influence that once surrounded him. Artists, managers, producers, lawyers. Some of them are holding their breath, hoping the cameras stay focused on one man. But the prosecution has already hinted in sealed motions that more subpoenas are coming. More doors are being opened. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, the prosecution has taken a subtle but effective approach with the jury. Every new piece of evidence isn't introduced with fanfare. It's presented quietly, methodically. A photo here, a text log there, a financial record, an invitation, a timestamp. But when you line them up, the picture becomes difficult to dismiss. Text messages recovered from hidden phones appear to show coded conversations about party schedules, guest arrivals, and security prep. More unsettling are the messages referencing VIP lists and ready rooms, vague language that prosecutors say is intentionally opaque, and possibly tied to events described in multiple civil suits. Investigators believe these messages may outline the logistics behind the so-called freak-offs, though defense attorneys argue the texts are vague, inconclusive, and open to interpretation. But it's not just the text messages. There's a growing paper trail. Flight records, invoices for security equipment, private surveillance logs. At first glance, they look like the boring back end of celebrity life. Until you realize they overlap perfectly with nights that accusers say their lives were changed forever. And then there's the silence. The silence from people who could say something. The silence from insiders who were always present, who booked the hotels, coordinated the drivers, signed the NDAs. Not one of them has come forward. Not publicly, not on social media, not even in leaks. That's what's most telling. Because silence in this case is not neutrality, it's complicity. And the public is starting to notice. Even political figures have been strangely mute. Elected officials who regularly comment on celebrity trials have stayed back. And legal analysts have quietly acknowledged what everyone's thinking. There's something about this case that feels untouchable, as if everyone's watching but no one's allowed to intervene. And perhaps the most disturbing part? The absence of accountability from the institutions that made Diddy untouchable for so long. Major record labels, streaming platforms, luxury brands, all of them profited from his image. And now none of them are speaking. Why? Because if Diddy falls, others may fall with him. And so, with every new court session, the tension climbs. The story is no longer about celebrity scandal. It's about a culture of silence, a chain of protection, a system that's been in place long before Diddy rose to fame and might still exist long after he's gone. The next court date is expected to bring more evidence, more closed sessions, and possibly another wave of legal motions from the defense trying to suppress testimony. But the dam is cracking, and once it breaks, the flood of truth may be unstoppable. So the question now isn't if Sean Combs will face justice. The question is, how many others will be dragged into the light with him? And what will we see when the cameras finally turn around?